Now we turn to Sanford, Florida, where the George Zimmerman trial continued today. Witnesses who were at the scene immediately after the shooting, well, they took to the stand. And our own Dominic Carter, he has got the latest on yet another day of an emotional test.
Indeed, quite an emotional day, Richard, as the jury is shown photos of Trayvon Martin's body, while prosecutors want to look at the past telephone actions of George Zimmerman. Crime scene photos showing Trayvon Martin lying dead in the grass, shown in court for the first time today.
Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the way Trayvon Martin's body was positioned when you approached it?
Yes, sir, it is.
The 17-year-old parents leaving the courtroom. The man on trial, charged with second-degree murder, at times looked away. George Zimmerman has pleaded not guilty, saying he shot the teen in February of last year in self-defense. His attorneys maintaining these photos of injuries to Zimmerman's head, shown to the jury again today, are evidence that he was attacked by Martin. But today, the prosecution tried to convince the judge to allow evidence they claim helped to prove the former Neighborhood Watch volunteer targeted the teen because he was fed up with people he viewed as suspicious walking through his neighborhood in Sanford, Florida. The judge now considering if she'll allow the jury to hear 5 calls Zimmerman made to police dispatchers prior to the night he shot Martin.
Motive and state of mind are classic jury questions, and the jury has a right to hear evidence that might relate to establishing those things.
What the state is going to show the jury, if you allow that evidence, is 4, 5, or 6 acts where my client has contacted the police to say, hey, come check it out. None of which is going to show ill will, hatred, spite.
But other evidence was presented to the jury today, including the now iconic hooded sweatshirt Martin was wearing when he died. Again, several times in 6 months, Zimmerman called police to report suspicious characters in the gated townhouse community where he lived. Each time when asked, he reported that the suspects were African-American males. Richard?
All right, Dominic, thank you. You know, yesterday I was saying, Mayor, and obviously you've been in more courtrooms than I ever will be. I'm not saying because I'm in trouble. The question, though, is we kind of know what happened that night. We don't know everything. We don't know some important details. But there's not up for debate. Kid with Skittles and a Mountain Dew was going back, or an iced tea was going back to his house. Zimmerman came upon him. We don't know exactly what ensued, who screamed. And we know that the gun in Zimmerman was used to kill Martin. And, okay. Is what will decide this case more important, what happened in that gap of time from when the two met, or what is more important, what the jury will believe what was in the state of mind of Zimmerman, and also what kind of a person Martin was before the two ever met that night?
Well, if it was a sexual assault case, in New York we have Rape Shield Acts where you don't even get a chance to get into the complainant or the victim's past. And I think it should basically, if you look at this case, you ought to be able to try it on the facts. You have some photos of Trayvon Martin in a hoodie. He's posing like teenagers sometimes pose, but there's no indication that he committed crimes or anything like that. Certainly nothing that was violent, and certainly nothing that George Zimmerman was aware of that would let him say, well, wow, this is Trayvon Martin. I'm aware of his reputation. Let me protect myself. Now, with respect to Zimmerman, if he has a habit or a routine that shows that he has done this in the past, or certainly not shot and killed people, but that he has been aggressive toward particular people in the past, then that may be an area to explore. Again, you have to look the fact that Trayvon Martin...
Do you think the judge will admit that in?
I'm not certain right now, but I don't have all of the information, enough information to determine it. But there's a possibility the judge would admit that, depending on what the foundation is for that to come in. But when you look at the fact that, again, Mr. Zimmerman is a grown man, probably twice the size of Trayvon Martin, that he has a gun and he knows he has a gun. So that also goes into your frame of mind that you're not a helpless person here without any weapon being approached by somebody, that you have Trayvon Martin walking away, according to George Zimmerman, and you have the police telling Mr. Zimmerman not to pursue him and letting him continue to pursue
But if you're
anyway.
the prosecutor, as you have been in other criminal cases, is the most important thing that you're trying to get into this jury's mind before they go and deliberate. These 6 women in Florida. Listen, this guy Zimmerman, he saw a kid, whatever color they were, but probably black, in a hoodie, and he said trouble, and he didn't listen to the cops, and he went forward. Or is it more important to say, look at who this guy is. This guy couldn't pass, he couldn't pass the test to become a cop. He was a constant guy who was just always on the phone with 911. Before that night, before the 2 ever locked eyes here, this was the trouble. What's more important to get in their heads?
Well, I think it's more important from my standpoint. I would want to make sure that you knew that he was a guy who basically was a police buff. He wanted to be a police officer, couldn't become one. So essentially he self-designated to become the police officer for that gated community. And I think it's most important to focus on the facts, because when you start going outside of the facts and you start hoping a jury's going to convict on something other than the facts, which, by the way, they should not. You should be convicted or acquitted based on what you did or didn't do. Then as you start to, if the defense is able to chip away at some of the things to show that, well, maybe, you know, there were reasons for him to make these calls, now you're starting to give the jury a basis for an acquittal.
Let me just ask you both here, because race and perceptions, depending on what race you are in this country, seems to be a common theme in the subject we're talking tonight. If they say the standard here, second-degree murder, is going to be too hard, and they go to lesser-included charges and they knock it down, because of the profile of this case, because of the racial components of this case, because of the sympathetic picture that are his parents every day, what do you think the reaction will be?
Well, it depends on what segment of the community. There are going to be people who are going to be very upset no matter what happens. There are going to be some people who feel that the trial was about race when it really was not. There are going to be people who feel if there's a conviction that the system's failed. There are going to be those who feel the same way if it's an acquittal. And there will be the same feeling if it's a lesser included. I think at the end of the day, I don't expect a lesser included conviction. I think either he'll be convicted or he'll be acquitted. And I think that's the case because, again, if anything, we talked about stand your ground in the past. The only person who really could articulate stand your ground, and as I see the facts unfolding, is Trayvon Martin. You have a kid who's home, essentially, and he's walking and he has no weapon, he has Skittles, he has a drink, and he's not confronting Mr. Zimmerman according to Mr. Zimmerman's own statements. He doesn't say, I'm being assaulted. There's no call to that effect. There's a call that he looks suspicious, and he's following him toward one of the exits or one of the gates. So, if anything, if you're being pursued by a person, in particular a grown man much bigger than you.
That's where stand your ground comes in. Stelman, what do you think?
Richard, Mr. Zimmerman has enormous problems. And because I know the moment he takes the stand, if I'm the prosecutor, I play that 911 tape again. Mr. Zimmerman, you were told do not pursue. Why did you do it? The prosecution's star witness, the young lady, Trayvon Martin may not be here to tell us what happened, but there is someone else that can tell us exactly what happened. The young lady that he was on the phone with, Trayvon Martin, she's the prosecution's star witness. How do you counter that? How do you get around that? You're going to have to character assassinate her, and that may not play well with the 6 women on this jury. So you asked about the lesser included charges. I've been through a number of these cases over the last 25 years. I think the community, meaning people of color, if Mr. Zimmerman walks on murder but is convicted on a lesser included of manslaughter, people won't be happy, but they'll feel that justice was done and that,
I'm already over, Andrew. Mayor said this trial's not about race. It sure feels like it is.
Well, the trial's not about race, but our reaction to it is almost certainly based on race, as is just about every issue we're talking about on the show tonight.
And when we come back, we're going to talk about one of the only issues that doesn't have to do with black and white, but it has to do with really the future here in many ways, of not just the environment, but so many other pressing questions of this country. The president making his most significant and sweeping address on climate change since he was elected more than 4.5 years ago. The question is, will all the rhetoric actually turn into reality? We'll hear from a former White House insider on this right after this break.